Three best friends hiked into Olympic Ridge one misty autumn morning and were never seen again. For over a decade, their disappearance haunted the Pacific Northwest. No bodies, no answers, just whispers of something ancient lurking in the forest. But now, 12 years later, a torn page from a forgotten diary has surfaced. A diary that speaks in riddles, a diary that knows too much. What began as a tragic cold case is about to unravel into something far darker, far stranger. This is not just a story about missing girls. This is about what happens when the forest remembers you, even when you've forgotten it. It was the kind of afternoon that lived forever in Polaroids. The late September sun filtered through the thinning canopy, casting golden flecks on the cracked pavement of Cedar Hollow Road. A breeze stirred the tall pines lining the edge of Olympic National Forest, rustling them like a whispered warning. But for Lena Torres, Haley Brooks, and Naomi Chan, best friends since middle school, it was the start of something beautiful, something memorable, something that was never meant to disappear. Lena sat cross-legged on the hood of Haley's Jeep Wrangler, her sketch pad balanced on her knees. She wasn't drawing anything specific, just scribbles of movement under trees, an expression she couldn't quite capture. Haley, standing nearby with her boot propped against a rock, checked their supplies again for the third time. Extra batteries, protein bars, water filters. Naomi was singing off-key, halfway through folding a map that absolutely refused to cooperate. "It's just 3 days," Haley said, more to herself than to anyone else. "We're not summiting Everest." "But we are summiting freedom," Naomi grinned, flashing a peace sign toward the tree line. "One last weekend before you two go off and become boring adults." Lena glanced up, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm not becoming boring. I'm becoming mysterious and tortured. There's a difference." They laughed, and in that laughter was a kind of unshakable belief that life would stay like this, vibrant, ironic, full of inside jokes and unspoken understandings. It was the last weekend before Lena left for art school in Portland. Haley had enlisted in the Coast Guard, shipping out in 2 weeks. Naomi still had one foot in the local community college, unsure but quietly unafraid. The three of them had grown up together in the fog-lined streets of Port Ellis, Washington, where the mountains pressed close and the ocean always felt a little too cold. They were inseparable, until now. "Ivy said we shouldn't go too far west," Haley muttered, folding the latest printout of a weather alert into her jacket. "Storms might pull in from the coast faster than usual." Lena blinked. "Ivy? As in the Ivy Delaney? The lady who talks to chipmunks at the ranger station?" "She's not that weird," Haley shrugged. "And she's not wrong either. Terrain up there's tricky after rain." Naomi rolled her eyes. "We'll be fine. It's supposed to be clear skies till Sunday." As if on cue, a low rumble echoed from the horizon. Distant, barely audible. Maybe thunder, maybe something else. No one acknowledged it. Instead, they crammed into the Jeep, laughing as Naomi yelled, "Road trip!" out the window like a kid in a movie. Lena filmed a quick clip on her camcorder. Naomi singing, Haley focused on the road, her own reflection flickering briefly in the rearview mirror. Later, she would pause that frame and wonder, was that where everything began to go wrong? They arrived at the trailhead by late afternoon. No other cars, no rangers, just the smell of damp pine, the sound of crows wheeling above, and a narrow trail leading into the thick, wild heart of the forest. It was exactly what they'd hoped for. They hiked for 2 hours, passing ferns taller than Lena, trees older than time. Naomi insisted on naming every clearing: Snack Rock, Spirit Hollow, Mosquito Vortex. Haley led with her compass in hand, mapping out landmarks like an amateur survivalist. Lena trailed behind, sketching Naomi's silhouette against the trees, and wondering what it meant to miss something before it was gone. By dusk, they had reached a ridge that curved like a crooked spine above a narrow ravine, a perfect place to pitch their tent. Dry ground, soft moss, views for miles. They set up camp beneath a tangle of red cedar and fir. Naomi found a small creek nearby, where she filled their canteens and made water jokes that were both gross and hilarious. Lena laid out their sleeping bags like it was a sacred ritual. Haley roasted something vaguely edible over a crackling fire and declared it dinner. Before bed, they passed around a battered composition notebook, Lena's idea. She called it the Ridge Diary. Each of them wrote a message on the first page. Haley, "To the woods that raised us, don't eat us." Naomi, 3 girls enter, 3 girls leave, maybe. Lena, If you're reading this, we found something worth remembering. She closed the cover and tied it with a piece of twine. The fire snapped. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried into the night. They stayed up late, watching stars bleed through the branches, whispering about the future like it was some unknowable kingdom just over the next hill. None of them mentioned the dark shape they thought they saw standing just past the firelight. None of them mentioned the feeling that someone, or something, was watching them. None of them dared. The second morning on the ridge broke slow and silver. Mist clung to the underbrush like a second skin, and the trees loomed still and silent as if the entire forest were holding its breath. Lena was the first to stir, her hair tangled, her cheeks flushed from sleep. She unzipped the tent carefully, not wanting to wake the others, and stepped outside into the dew-soaked silence. She stood for a moment, arms wrapped around herself, staring out into the layers of trees that faded like ghosts into the haze. Somewhere, a bird called once and then went quiet. Lena felt her fingers twitch for her sketch pad, but instead she reached for the Ridge diary and opened to a blank page. With charcoal she'd pocketed the night before, she began to draw. A cluster of trees with heavy limbs, a tent barely visible through the fog, and just beyond that, something tall, indistinct. She hesitated, then shaded it in anyway. By the time Haley and Naomi woke, the air had shifted. A wind had picked up, tugging at the edges of the tent. The sun, once promised by every forecast they'd read, had vanished behind a wall of darkening clouds. "That wasn't supposed to happen," Naomi said, squinting upward. "No rain," they said. "They also said Leonardo DiCaprio would win Best Actor in '97, Haley replied, snapping tent flaps closed. "People are wrong," but the tension in her voice gave her away. She was worried. Still, they tried to keep the morning light. Naomi told a dumb story about a moose chase from summer camp. Lena filmed Haley brushing her teeth with pine sap because she'd forgotten the toothpaste. But beneath the jokes, there was a hum, low and rising, like distant thunder rolling over the ocean. By noon, that hum had become a growl. The trees bent in strange directions. The birds vanished. The air turned thick and electric, every breath carrying the static taste of metal. Rain didn't fall at first. It lashed, sideways and furious, stinging exposed skin like needles. The ridge that had felt so safe now pulsed with threat. "We need to move the tent," Haley said, shouting over the wind. "Downhill. We're too exposed here." Naomi grabbed the stakes, Lena her sketch pad and camcorder. But then, the sound. It wasn't thunder, not entirely. It was a crack, a howl, and then something worse, a shriek. Not human, not animal, just wrong. The girls froze. "Did you hear?" Naomi started. "Yeah," Haley cut in. They turned as one toward the tree line, eyes scanning for movement. There was nothing. Just shifting branches and a curtain of gray rain, thick as smoke. "Go!" Haley barked. "Move!" They stumbled downhill, hauling their supplies, slipping in the mud. Lena dropped the diary, turned back for it, but Naomi had already scooped it up. "I got it! Just go!" They found a shallow alcove beneath a large overhanging rock, partially shielded from the wind. It was cramped, but enough for the three of them to sit. Naomi tried to laugh. "Guess we're getting the real wilderness experience, huh?" But her voice trembled. Lena's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Haley stared out into the trees, eyes squinting against the storm. Hours passed. The wind howled like something alive. Branches cracked and fell. The rain became sleet. At one point, Naomi pulled out the diary and flipped to a new page. September 29th, 2001. Storm won't stop. Tents gone. Compass gone. We hear something. Not thunder, not wind. Something else. Lena drew beside the writing. A jagged shape, faceless, just beyond the edge of the trees. They huddled together through the night, barely sleeping. Sometime past midnight, Haley crawled to the edge of the alcove to relieve herself behind a boulder. She was gone maybe 2 minutes. When she returned, her face was pale. "Something's out there," she whispered. "I saw lights, not flashlights. Just small, glowing, floating. Near the old pine line." Naomi muttered, "Maybe it's a ranger." Haley shook her head. They weren't moving right, not like a person. None of them spoke after that. The next morning, the storm had passed, but the world had changed. Trees were snapped in half. The ground was scarred with slides, and their tent, their supplies, gone. Swept away or stolen, they didn't know. "We need to find shelter," Lena said quietly. "Somewhere dry, somewhere hidden." They moved slowly, conserving energy, navigating with instinct. Naomi joked less now. Haley had gone quiet. Lena just watched the trees, certain she saw movement out of the corner of her eye. Once, she turned fast enough to catch a figure ducking behind a tree. She didn't tell the others. At midday, they found a path, not on any map they had, just a faint trail carved by animals or something else, leading deeper into the forest, toward the far side of Olympic Ridge. None of them questioned whether they should follow it. For 18 years, the ridge remained silent. Seasons came and went like old promises, blanketing the Olympic forest in rain and snow and blossoms that bloomed only to vanish again. Time eroded the trail markers and blurred the outlines of memory until the disappearance of Lena Torres, Haley Brooks, and Naomi Chan became less of a tragedy and more of a local myth. A story whispered between overgrown fences and half-remembered in graduation yearbooks. People moved on, as they always do. Search parties dwindled from dozens to one man with a dog and a flashlight. The flyers, once bright and hopeful, faded under layers of weather and tape, their edges curling like leaves in October. The girls' families clung to what they could. Lena's mother refused to take down the string lights Lena had hung in her bedroom, claiming they still flickered on windy nights. Naomi's older brother boxed up her journals but never threw them away, and sometimes, just sometimes, he'd read them aloud to the empty room. Haley's father kept the Jeep, untouched, parked beneath a tarp in their driveway. He washed it once a month, even when the rain fell sideways. But the rest of the town, the teachers, the coaches, the shop owners who once called them by name, slowly learned how to forget. It was easier that way. Easier to believe they'd simply gotten lost, overtaken by the storm, their remains scattered somewhere unreachable. Easier than facing the questions no one could answer. Why were there no signs of struggle? Why had no belongings been found? And why had the ranger on duty, one Ivy Delaney, reported seeing them near a trail that didn't exist on any map? Ivy had retired shortly after the storm. She sold her home and moved to a smaller cabin near the coast, claiming she wanted a quieter life. People let her go. No one questioned her silence. But Ivy never truly left the ridge, not in her mind. The image of the three girls, laughing, full of breath and possibility, waving at her from the ranger station parking lot, clung to her like wet moss. She remembered warning them not to go past the West Ridge. She remembered Naomi joking that they'd summon Bigfoot if they stayed out too long. She remembered the look on Lena's face, that quiet calm, the sketchbook tucked beneath her arm like a secret. And Ivy remembered what she saw the next morning, before the storm broke. 3 figures already halfway up a trail that hadn't existed the day before, walking single file, like they were being led. She told herself, over and over, that it wasn't her fault, that storms don't wait for maps or memory, that teenagers don't always listen. But the guilt rooted itself deep, growing inside her, until even the wind through pine needles sounded like voices she should have saved. And so, every year, without fail, on the anniversary of the storm, Ivy returned to Olympic Ridge. She never told anyone. She brought flowers. She whispered their names into the moss-covered air. She stood in the same place she'd last seen them and waited, just in case. Elsewhere, their names lived on only in articles buried beneath search engine results, in digital forums filled with amateur sleuths and half-baked theories. Some claimed they'd run away. Others believed foul play. A few swore the forest itself had swallowed them whole. One theory stood out above the rest, a rumor, always dismissed but never disproven, that someone, possibly a ranger, had encountered them during the storm and turned them away. Or worse, led them deeper in. It was a theory that haunted Jesse Torres, Lena's younger brother, who had only been 6 when she vanished. Now grown, he returned to Port Ellis in 2019 after a failed startup and a breakup he couldn't quite explain. He came back not to chase ghosts, he told himself, but because something felt unfinished. Something in the way their story just stopped, as if a page had been torn out. Jesse spent weeks combing the old files his parents had kept. He reached out to the Brooks and the Chans. They hadn't spoken in years, but they all felt the same thing. A weight in the chest that never lifted, an ache that sharpened each fall. Jesse visited the ranger station. The current staff knew nothing. The archives were incomplete. Ivy Delaney's reports from that weekend were missing, officially misfiled. He walked to the trailhead, stood where Lena once filmed Naomi singing off-key, closed his eyes, and listened. Nothing. Not even birdsong. Until one morning in early spring, when the forest trembled again, not from thunder or wind, but from something more ancient. A rock slide tore through the southern slope of the ridge, dislodging layers of earth that had been untouched for decades. Hikers found debris scattered between boulders, part of a torn tent flap, a rusted zipper, and finally, wedged beneath a split log, something soft, wrapped in plastic. A notebook, hand-stitched, weather-stained, but inside, the pages still spoke, in Lena's unmistakable handwriting. If someone finds this, we didn't give up. We waited. We heard voices. We tried to follow them. The news spread like fire. Reporters descended, cameras rolled, and just like that, the ridge remembered. The girls were no longer lost in silence. They were speaking again. And the town of Port Ellis would no longer be allowed to forget. Dot. They called it a miracle, though the forest didn't feel like a place where miracles happened. It felt heavy, wet with moss and memory, burdened by things that had been buried too long. The notebook, discovered by accident after the spring landslide, was fragile but intact, its cover crafted from strips of denim and bound with coarse twine. The pages inside, though spotted with mildew and blurred in places, bore the unmistakable touch of Lena Torres. Careful script, precise sketches, the kind of handwriting that seemed to think before it moved. It wasn't just a diary, it was a survival record, an emotional map of the last hours, or days, of 3 girls the town had already buried in their minds. Jesse Torres held it in his hands the way someone might hold a living bird, gently, reverently, terrified of crushing it. The first entry was dated September 29th, 2001, written the morning after the storm had hit. It described the panic of losing their tent, the confusion of unfamiliar sounds in the night, and a sense of being watched. Naomi thought she saw a flashlight in the trees, Lena had written. But it moved too fast. No one said anything, but we were all thinking the same thing. We're not alone out here. The next page was even harder to read. The ink had run in long vertical streaks, as though the page had been soaked in tears or rain or both. Still, some phrases stood out. We followed the trail even though we didn't trust it. And Haley says we should stay put, but I think she's scared of what's behind us. There were drawings too, a twisted tree with rope marks on its bark, a boot print too large to be theirs, and a sketch of what looked like a distant cabin drawn from memory. Its roof slanted, its chimney cracked. The sheriff's department sealed off the area immediately. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, the disappearance of Lena, Naomi, and Haley was officially reopened. But this wasn't the same sleepy investigation from 2001. Now, there were drones, infrared imaging, forensic botanists, and data analysts poring over every inch of the ridge. And watching it all from the edge of town, clutching her coat too tightly even in the afternoon sun, was Ivy Delaney. When questioned by the press, she refused to speak, but her eyes said enough. Jesse recognized the look. It was the same one his mother had worn for years, some combination of guilt, fear, and the kind of sorrow that never learned how to sleep. Sarah Hollins, a young forensic investigator newly assigned to the case, took particular interest in the diary. She digitized the entries, enhanced faded ink, cross-referenced trail markers, and even consulted a handwriting analyst to confirm Lena's authorship. Everything checked out. But the real shock came when they reached the final page. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, as though written in darkness or under extreme duress. If you find this, tell our families we tried, we waited. But the voices came back. Closer. Naomi's not waking up. Haley's gone to look for help. I'm so cold. The sentence ended in a jagged line, the pen mark dragging off the page. Jesse had to step outside when he read it. He walked past the camera crews, past the parked vans, and into the forest, where the only sound was the soft crunch of wet leaves beneath his boots. He didn't cry, not exactly, but something in him cracked, as if the years of not knowing had finally turned into something real and sharp and unbearable. Back at the sheriff's station, Sarah arranged the diary pages on a corkboard. She noticed something odd about Lena's sketches, particularly the one of the boot print. It had a distinct tread pattern, one she recognized from another case involving vintage Ranger gear from the early 1980s. A quick search through the old inventory records revealed only a handful of Rangers issued those boots in the area. One name stood out: Ivy Delaney. When confronted, Ivy didn't deny it. She simply said, "I warned them not to go past the ridge. I told them it was unstable." But the way she said unstable made Sarah pause. Unstable terrain or unstable something else. That night, Jesse stayed up late in his childhood home, the notebook on the kitchen table, a flashlight in one hand, and a magnifying glass in the other. His eyes scanned Lena's drawings again and again until he saw it. Something small, but unmistakable. In the corner of one page, almost hidden in a tangle of cross-hatching, was a shape, a triangle made of 3 dots connected by faint lines. He flipped to another page. It was there again, drawn in the dirt beneath a tree. A third time, carved faintly into the side of the imagined cabin. The same symbol. He brought it to Sarah the next morning. She stared at it for a long time before saying, "That's a location, a triangulation mark." Lena was trying to map something. Together they overlaid her sketches onto topographical maps of the area. The triangle pointed to a remote zone just beyond the ridge, land that had been deemed too treacherous to search back in 2001 due to rockfall and seasonal flooding, a place with no recorded shelters, no trails, and no public access. Sarah ordered a drone survey. What it found chilled them both. A rectangular shape beneath a thick canopy of trees, with what looked like a collapsed roof and a narrow path leading away. It wasn't on any map. No records, no permits, nothing. The forest had hidden it well. Until now, 3 days after the drone footage confirmed the presence of a hidden structure deep within Olympic Ridge, a small padded envelope arrived at the Port Ellis Gazette with no return address, no fingerprints, and no explanation. Inside it was a 35mm film canister, weathered, dented, but sealed, and a folded note on yellowed stationery that read only, "You're asking the right questions. This might help." The editor handed it to the sheriff's department without hesitation. The lab technician who developed the film did so in complete silence, eyes widening with each frame that came into view beneath the red light. There were 12 photographs in total. The first 3 were familiar, snapshots of Lena, Haley, and Naomi, grinning with trail mix in their teeth, striking dramatic poses with tree branches as swords, the kind of moments that only girls who trusted the woods, and each other, could create. But the rest were different, darker, blurred by motion, shadow, and something else entirely. One showed a fire pit smoldering in a rocky enclosure, a figure sitting nearby with her back to the camera. The outline was unmistakably female, the posture rigid, watchful, as if listening for something behind her. The next image was more troubling, a view from inside a shelter, crude and narrow, with branches for walls and tarps draped like rotting skin. In the corner, barely illuminated by the camera's flash, was Naomi's notebook, closed, tied with twine, and next to it a pair of muddy boots that didn't belong to any of the girls. But it was the 7th photograph that shattered Jesse. In it, Lena stood between 2 trees, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, as if caught mid-breath. She was staring directly at the camera, not smiling, not surprised, just resigned. And behind her, reflected in the sheen of rainwater on the bark, was a blurry outline of someone else, a taller figure, unidentifiable, looming, watching. The final photograph was the one that made Sarah stop breathing for a full 10 seconds. It was an image of a ridge at night, fog curling along its edge like smoke from a fire. 3 figures stood in silhouette, facing the trees, and just beyond them, faint but undeniable, was a single pinpoint of light, suspended in the air, not a lantern, not a headlamp, just hovering. When enhanced, the light revealed a halo of mist around it, and something else beneath, the faint edge of a raincoat, orange, torn, weather-beaten, Ivy Delaney's raincoat. When shown the photo, Ivy didn't speak. She stared at it for a long time, her face pale and unreadable, and then simply stood up and walked out of the room. She locked her cabin door that night and refused to answer any further questions. Sarah returned to the evidence board, pinning each photo beside Lena's journal sketches, overlaying timelines, tracing footprints, matching outlines. The journal entries from the last night now took on new weight. "We saw someone again, the same coat. She doesn't answer when we call out. I think she's pretending not to hear us." Jesse refused to believe Ivy had meant harm, but he no longer believed she was innocent. Not entirely. Meanwhile, the town began to fracture under the weight of renewed attention. Reporters camped along the edge of the forest. Former classmates of the girls gave interviews. Conspiracy theories multiplied online. Some accused the government of a cover-up. Others claimed the forest was cursed, and a few whispered that the girls had never left, that they had become part of the forest itself. watching anyone who dared trespass. Denise, the amateur researcher who had followed the case since college, joined Sarah and Jesse in building a comprehensive digital timeline. She noticed something curious. The last photo on the film roll bore a date stamp of October 5th, 2001, 6 full days after the girls were presumed dead. It meant someone had the camera long after the search had ended. It meant someone had seen them alive. It meant the girls had survived longer than anyone dared to hope. The question now was, who took the photo? And why had they waited 18 years to send it? Jesse began to believe there was someone else out there, someone who knew the truth but hadn't come forward. Maybe out of fear, maybe guilt, maybe something darker. That night, while reviewing Lena's final sketch from the notebook, a crude map with an X scrawled beside a tree symbol, Sarah compared it to modern satellite overlays. The tree's location matched the edge of an old fire trail decommissioned in 1998 after multiple washouts. No one had been up there in over a decade. With the sheriff's hesitant approval, she and Jesse hiked the trail the following morning, fog curling around their legs like smoke from a forgotten fire. As they neared the spot marked by Lena's drawing, they saw it. A tall cedar, gnarled with age, and nailed to its base, almost obscured by lichen and rot, was a wooden sign. It read, "Keep out." And beneath it, scratched deep into the bark, were 3 letters, LHN. Sarah traced her finger along the groove. They had made it this far. They had left signs. And someone, somehow, had followed them. The knock on Ivy Delaney's door came just after sunset, when the sky bled orange into violet and the forest behind her cabin seemed to lean closer, listening. She hadn't answered calls in days, not since the photographs were released. Not since her raincoat, recognizable even in grainy darkness, appeared in the frame behind Lena's terrified eyes. But when Ivy opened the door and saw Jesse Torres standing there, his face hollow with grief and years of silent questions, she didn't slam it. She didn't pretend not to recognize him. Instead, she stepped aside, wordlessly, and let him in. The cabin smelled of cedarwood, rain, and old ink. Notebooks were stacked against the walls. Trail maps littered the table. Jessie sat down across from her as she poured tea with hands that trembled slightly. She didn't speak for a long time, just watched the steam rise and vanish like everything else she'd tried to hold on to. Finally, Jessie broke the silence. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Ivy looked at him, eyes sunken but sharp. "Because I wasn't sure what I saw." "You saw them," he said. "You saw my sister. After the storm. You knew they were alive." She closed her eyes, then nodded once. "Yes, I saw them. Not all 3. Just Lena. It was a day or 2 after the rain stopped. I was hiking the perimeter, standard protocol after extreme weather. I spotted movement near the fire line. At first I thought it was a deer. Then I saw her face, pale, wet. She had something in her arms. I think it was that journal. She was staring at me, but she didn't move, didn't call out." Jessie leaned forward. "What did you do?" "I took 1 step toward her," Ivy whispered, "but something moved behind her. I don't know what it was, too far to see, but it wasn't right. I felt this chill, like every hair on my neck lifted at once. And then Lena was gone, slipped behind the trees like smoke. I looked for her. I swear to God, I did, for hours." But there was nothing. She stared into her teacup. "The forest has places it doesn't want us to go. I felt it that day. Like I wasn't supposed to be there, like something was watching me, and not kindly." Jessie's knuckles whitened against the edge of the table. "So you buried it, for 18 years. Ivy didn't deny it. "I thought it was a trick of the storm. I told myself she couldn't have survived. No one could have. But I saw her eyes. And every time I closed mine, they were there, staring at me like they were asking why I walked away." Jessie stood and paced the cabin, fury barely contained. "You could have told someone. They might have searched the right area. They might have found them. Or gotten themselves killed," Ivy said sharply. "You don't know what it's like up there. That part of the ridge, it's wrong. I used to call it the blind hollow. Radios don't work. Trails vanish overnight. It's like the mountain shifts when it wants to. Or like someone made it that way," Jessie snapped. Ivy didn't answer. The silence between them crackled with things too painful to say. At last, she stood, moved to the bookshelf, and pulled down a battered leather journal. "This isn't official," she said, placing it on the table. "It's mine, my notes, from back then." Jesse opened it slowly. Inside were hand-drawn maps, weather patterns, and a list of strange sightings from other hikers. Voices in the fog, paths that led in circles, lights at night with no source. And there, in Ivy's scrawled handwriting, an entry dated October 3rd, 2001. Saw girl again, same ridge. She's not alone, not sure who or what is with her, feels wrong, feels watched, left immediately. Sarah Holland scanned every page when Jesse brought the journal to the station. She cross-referenced Ivy's notes with a decade's worth of missing persons cases in the Olympic National Forest. 8 unexplained disappearances, all within a 2-mile radius of the ridge, all during extreme weather, all unsolved. What if Lena and the others stumbled into something, she asked, something that wasn't meant to be found? That same evening, Denise, who had been working from home in silence, called Jesse. Her voice was tight. "I found something," she said. "In one of the old ranger reports from '96, there's mention of a shelter. Not a cabin, something older. Possibly man-made, maybe even from the logging days. It was marked unsafe and wiped from the public maps." She paused. "It matches the triangle Lena drew in her sketches, and the spot where the drone saw the structure, it lines up." They hiked out the next morning. Sarah, Jesse, Denise, and, unexpectedly, Ivy. She didn't speak much, but when she did, it was to warn them which rocks would roll, which moss patches hid sinkholes, which tree roots would twist underfoot. She moved like someone who knew the forest had teeth. As they neared the ridge, clouds thickened overhead. Wind whispered through the firs in a language none of them could quite name. And then, there it was, half collapsed, swallowed by vines and shadow. A shelter built into the hillside, barely visible unless you were standing above it. They climbed down. Ivy stayed back. Sarah raised her flashlight. The beam cut through dust and time. Inside were rotting blankets, a cracked mirror, the remains of a campfire, and on the wall, carved deep into the wood, 3 names: Lena, Naomi, Haley. Jesse ran his fingers over each one. Then, just beneath them, in different handwriting, one final word: stay. Outside, thunder rolled once, distant, low, almost a warning. The ridge had spoken, and it wasn't done. The interior of the shelter smelled like old wood and damp earth, the kind of rot that clung to the skin and crept under fingernails. Sarah stood still, flashlight beam fixed on the carvings in the wall, while Jesse stepped closer, fingers trembling as they traced the names etched decades ago by hands too young, too hopeful. Denise snapped photos silently, her breath shallow, eyes flicking to every corner of the shelter, like something might still be living there, hiding just beyond the darkness. But what struck them more than the names, more than the eerie preservation of this forgotten space, was that single word carved below the names: stay. Not help, not gone, not goodbye, just stay, as if it had been a command or a desperate plea. Sarah crouched near the old fire pit in the center, brushing away layers of ash and leaves. Hidden beneath, wrapped in a strip of torn rain jacket, was a scrap of notebook paper, the ink smeared but legible in the center. "We stayed as long as we could, but it got closer. I'm sorry." No name, no date, just that. The silence in the cabin thickened. Ivy, still standing outside near the tree line, called down in a firm, distant voice, "Storm's coming, you'll want to move soon." And she wasn't wrong. The wind had shifted, sharp and rising, but none of them moved yet. Sarah turned toward the wall where the names were carved, and that's when she noticed it. The wall had been reinforced, not recently, but deliberately. The planks were mismatched, as if patched with scavenged boards from other structures. And behind one of them, faint but visible where the nails had rusted through, was the outline of something hidden. Jesse helped her pry it loose. Behind the board was a hollowed-out space lined with cloth, like someone had tried to soundproof it. Inside was a bundle wrapped in an old sweatshirt, gray, printed with the faded logo of Port Ellis High. They opened it carefully. Inside were 3 items: a harmonica, scratched and dented, a compass with a cracked face engraved with the initials HC, Haley's, and a plastic flashlight missing its batteries, crusted with dried mud, but still faintly luminous under the beam of Sarah's phone. There was also a photograph. Unfolded and curled at the corners, it showed the 3 girls inside the very shelter they were standing in. Lena held the harmonica, Naomi leaned into her shoulder, and Haley stood just behind them, her hand raised in a peace sign, half smiling. The photo had been taken from the back of the shelter by someone else. Someone else had been there with them. Someone behind the camera. Jesse stared at it so long his eyes stung. They weren't alone, he whispered. Denise examined the edges. Look, this was torn from a larger sheet. There might have been more. They searched the rest of the shelter, overturning stones, peeling back mats of moss, checking every beam, but they found nothing else. The storm broke above them just as they emerged, a cold, slanting rain that came down in sheets. Ivy handed out ponchos without a word and led them down the ridge trail, her pace urgent, posture rigid. No one spoke until they reached the vehicle, soaked and silent. Back at the station, Sarah uploaded the photo to a database of missing persons from 2001. No match came back for the hand that held the camera or the figure reflected faintly in the cracked mirror behind the girls. But something else did. A partial match from a photo submitted to the Gazette back in 2003, anonymously, as part of a wildfire memorial. It showed a group of volunteers clearing debris near Olympic Ridge. In the background, barely noticeable, stood a man watching from the tree line. Same posture, same outline, wearing a parka with a ranger's badge stitched to the sleeve, but not any modern ranger issue. A vintage badge, one from the 80s. The discovery opened a door no one was ready for. Sarah requested all ranger logs from 1980 through 2005. One name appeared multiple times in redacted reports. Alan Drest. A seasonal ranger, hired and rehired through contract gaps. Dismissed quietly in 1994 after a series of complaints, erratic behavior, refusing to log trail reports, becoming increasingly hostile to hikers. No charges filed. No forwarding address. But Ivy knew the name. When she saw it, her face paled. He used to talk about the forest like it was alive, she said softly. He hated people coming in. Said they left scars on the land. He camped in places no one else would touch. Off-map clearings, dead ground, the kind that doesn't grow back. Jesse's voice cracked. You think he found them? Ivy hesitated. I think they found each other. And then I think something went wrong. That night, Jesse couldn't sleep. He lay on his back staring at the ceiling, the image of his sister's eyes in that photograph etched against the inside of his eyelids. They weren't afraid. They were tired, resigned, but not defeated. Like she still hoped someone might find what they left behind. And maybe that was the truth of it. Maybe the shelter wasn't just a place to hide. Maybe it was their message, a way to say, we were here. We fought. We waited. And we mattered. The cabin they never built had become their final home. A place born not from logs and nails, but from desperation, courage, and the bond between three girls who refused to vanish quietly. But the forest still held pieces, shadows, and the hand behind the camera was still out there, somewhere, watching. The cabin stayed in Jesse's mind long after they left it. Its scent, its silence, and that photograph haunting him like a half-remembered nightmare. But it wasn't until Sarah called him back 2 days later, voice tight and brittle, that he realized they had missed something. Something hidden in plain sight. You need to come in, she said. And when he arrived at the sheriff's evidence room, she was already there, crouched over a series of digital scans pinned across the corkboard like a forensic constellation. At the center were high-resolution images of the cabin's interior, specifically the back wall, the same one where the girls had carved their names. But now, under ultraviolet enhancement, another layer of markings had begun to emerge. Not drawings, not writing with ink or charcoal, but shallow indentations, dozens of them, etched directly into the wooden beams, faint and uneven, as though scratched with a nail or a small blade. Sarah gestured toward the largest plank. This wasn't visible to the naked eye, she said, too faded, too weather-worn. But once we ran it through the scanner, the pattern became clearer. Jesse stepped closer. The marks weren't random, they weren't artistic. They were words. Letters repeated over and over, clumsy and desperate, some barely legible. Stay away, stay away, stay away. Beneath them, in shakier lines, he's still here. I saw him. I hear him at night. The deeper he looked, the worse it became. Scratching, whispers, not the wind. Something about those words sent a shiver down Jesse's spine that no logic could suppress. Sarah exhaled shakily. Someone, maybe Lena, maybe one of the others, was trying to warn whoever came next. Or they were trying to stay sane, to hold on to themselves. Jesse swallowed hard. Or maybe both. But it wasn't just the words. Hidden in the lowest corner, barely a few inches off the ground, they found a sequence of tallies. 87 vertical marks grouped in sets of 5, scratched in with such pressure that some had dug grooves into the wood. Days, Sarah whispered. They were alive for almost 3 months. Not 3 days, not a week. Months. Jesse felt his chest tighten. 3 months. That meant someone had been helping them, or watching them, or both. But it didn't end there. One of the photos Denise had taken showed a loose floorboard beneath the harmonica. Jesse hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now he asked Sarah to magnify it. There, barely visible, was a small rusted screw that looked out of place, newer than the rest of the structure. They returned to the cabin the next morning. Ivy didn't come this time. She said she'd said enough. Rain fell in fits as they hiked, the forest slick and breathing mist. When they arrived, Jesse moved straight to the board. He unscrewed it with shaking fingers. Beneath was a hollow compartment no bigger than a lunchbox, and inside, wrapped in a strip of canvas, was another bundle of notes, water-damaged, mold-streaked, but protected just enough to survive. There were 6 pages in total, written in different hands. Sarah recognized Haley's signature sharp lettering, Lena's soft curves, and Naomi's loopy cursive. They weren't journal entries. They were letters, final ones, to family, to each other, to no one. Jesse read Lena's first. Mom, if you're reading this, it means someone found us. I'm sorry I couldn't come home. We tried. Naomi kept us laughing. Haley kept us alive. I just drew. I drew everything so we wouldn't forget. Even when it got quiet. Even when we didn't know what day it was. I miss warm things. I miss you. But I was never alone. Haley's note was shorter, written with resolve. We stayed. We fought. We stayed. He kept coming back, always at night. Never spoke. Just stood there. We never asked what he wanted. We just listened. One night, Naomi followed him. I told her not to. I should have followed, but I was too afraid. If this is found, tell my brother I did my best. Naomi's letter was hardest to read. The ink blurred, the sentences trailing off, like she had been fading as she wrote. I think I see my dad in dreams. I think I hear Lena humming when she's not. Haley holds my hand when I shake. I don't know what's real anymore, but I want to believe someone will find this. That we mattered, that we existed. Jesse folded the notes with care, tears sliding silently down his face. Sarah said nothing. Her own hands trembled. They carried the letters back down the mountain in silence, each step weighted with a new understanding. The girls hadn't just survived. They had endured, together, through fear and confusion and the slow erosion of hope. But one question now consumed everything. Who was he? The figure Naomi followed. The man in the shadows, the one who returned again and again, never speaking, just watching. Back at the station, Sarah dug deeper into ranger files, historical records, even interviews with old hikers, and a name kept surfacing, not always directly, but as a whisper. Alan Drest. The man Ivy once described as wild-eyed, paranoid, obsessed with protecting the forest from intruders. He had vanished in 1994, presumed dead. But no body had ever been recovered. His cabin had been condemned. No one ever searched it thoroughly. Until now. Jesse looked at the scratched walls again before they left for the next search. He ran his fingers across the grooves, feeling the desperation etched into every line. Not just warnings, not just fears, but echoes of voices long silenced. Whispers that had clawed at the edge of madness. Whispers that still lingered. As the door creaked closed behind him, he thought he heard one of those whispers himself. Faint and far away, just 3 words. We stayed alive. The wind shifted as they approached the old ranger trail, the trees bending slightly as if reacting to something unseen, and though the sun still hovered behind clouds, the forest felt dimmer, darker, as if it remembered what they were looking for. Jesse didn't speak as they followed the narrow path Ivy once marked on a map from 1987, now barely visible beneath fallen needles and moss, but every step felt heavier. As if the weight of every unanswered question pressed down harder with each footfall. Sarah walked ahead, compass in hand, scanning for any sign of the condemned structure once listed under Alan Drest's patrol zone. It wasn't on any official record now, but she had pieced together fragments of reports, scattered mentions in handwritten ranger logs, and a single red X drawn by Ivy herself long ago. Drawn, but never explained. The path took them deeper into a part of the forest where sound became strange, echoing faintly and then vanishing midair, where the ground turned soft underfoot and the canopy above filtered light like stained glass. And then, between two leaning cedars, they saw it. Not a cabin exactly, but something older, half collapsed, built from uneven logs, its roof caved in on one side, the door long rotted away. The structure sagged into the hillside like a wounded animal, and Jesse's heart began to pound, not from exertion, but from something deeper, a primitive instinct that screamed at him to turn around, but they didn't. They stepped inside. The air was stale, a blend of mildew, rust, and something else metallic and sour. The floor was littered with broken crates, rusted tin cans, and papers blackened by mold. A broken lantern lay in the corner, shattered glass beneath it. Sarah knelt near what looked like a desk and carefully opened a drawer. Inside were notebooks, 5 of them, each labeled with dates that spanned the years between 1983 and 1994. The last year Alan Drest had been officially seen. She flipped through them, pages crackling, revealing entries that started mundane. Weather logs, trail conditions, wildlife sightings. But slowly the tone shifted. Saw hikers again. Didn't like how they looked at the trees. They don't listen. They leave trash. They poison the ground. Tried to warn them. One followed me. I left them a sign. The handwriting grew erratic, pressed harder into the paper, as though the writer had begun to lose control of the pen, or his mind. The forest speaks. It groans when they come. I hear it in my sleep. I buried the map. It's safer that way. 3 more came. Girls this time. They laughed too loud. Jesse froze. The date matched the girl's disappearance. October 1st, 2001. The next page was torn, and the one after that held only one line, repeated over and over in ink so dark it had bled through. He's still here. Jesse stepped back from the desk, his stomach tight. He turned toward the fireplace, long dead, and saw something wedged in the ash. Sarah helped him pull it out. A metal box, dented, locked, but not sealed. Inside were dozens of Polaroids, faded, warped by moisture, but in them were images of the ridge, the shelter, even blurry distant shots of the girls taken from behind, never facing the lens. Jesse's hands shook as he flipped through them, each photo colder than the last. In one, Lena sat by the fire drawing, oblivious. In another, Naomi stood by the creek washing something. And in the final one, Haley looked straight into the camera, eyes hard, jaw clenched, as if she had heard something behind her and turned too late. None of these had ever been shared. None had been found before. They had been here. Drest had been watching them. But had he helped them, trapped them, or worse? Jesse stepped outside for air, lungs tight, vision blurred. He looked around the clearing, and for the briefest moment, he thought he saw someone standing at the tree line, tall, motionless, watching. He blinked. The figure was gone. He said nothing to Sarah. Not yet. Back at the station, Sarah compiled everything. The journals, the photographs, the scratched warnings from the shelter, the final letters. Together they painted a chilling picture. 3 girls lost in a storm, found by a man already lost to the forest. A man whose grip on reality had frayed long before their paths crossed. Ivy returned quietly that night. She brought a single object, a worn canvas map pouch, tied with twine and mud-stained. "He gave this to me once," she said. "Said I'd know when to use it. I didn't understand then. That inside was a hand-drawn map, intricate and coated with markings known only to rangers, showing paths that no longer existed, trails washed away by time, and at the center of it all, a symbol, a triangle, 3 points connected, a ridge, a shelter, and something else, a place not yet found, marked simply, mouth. Sarah stared at it, pulse accelerating. "Is that a cave?" Ivy nodded. "He called it the place the forest breathes." Jesse looked up. "Then that's where they went." Ivy hesitated. "Or where he took them." That night, Jesse couldn't sleep. Not because of the images, not because of the words, but because of the sound. Something he hadn't told anyone. While standing outside that old cabin, in the hush of the trees and the hush of his mind, he had heard something, a whisper, faint, from behind the trees, not a voice he recognized, but the words were clear. "You're too late." And then silence. They hiked at first light, Ivy guiding them, using the old ranger map folded neatly into her coat pocket. Its creases so worn they looked like veins, pulsing with stories yet told. The triangle marked mouth sat a full 5 miles past the last trail, nestled in a part of Olympic Ridge known among locals only in whispers, the Hollow Run. It wasn't on any current maps, erased after a landslide in 1996 had swallowed most of the switchback trails leading toward it. But Ivy said Drest always spoke of it like a sacred place, not sacred in a holy sense, but in a primitive one, as if something older than man had claimed it first. They moved in silence, boots sinking into spongy earth. The forest denser now, more suffocating, like it didn't want them passing through. Fog slithered low along the mossy floor, and the further they walked, the more the air began to smell not just of pine and rain, but of decay, faint, almost sweet. By noon they reached a rock formation that matched the symbol on the map, a granite ridge that looked fractured down the middle like a wound in the mountain. Ivy stopped and pointed toward a narrow crevice just beyond a fallen tree. "That's it," she said. "That's the mouth." Sarah went first. The space was tight, barely wide enough for a grown person to slip through sideways, and the moment they passed into the darkness, the forest behind them seemed to vanish. The temperature dropped immediately. Their breath became visible. Flashlights swept across damp stone walls as they pressed deeper into the earth, the sound of water dripping echoing like footsteps that weren't theirs. Jesse trailed behind, heart thudding, eyes darting not forward but behind, every so often catching the sense of motion, something ducking behind a boulder, something watching. The passage opened into a chamber, wide and uneven, with a low ceiling and jagged walls. In the center, a fire pit long, cold, and ringed with bones. Animal bones, cracked and darkened. Ivy crouched beside the pit, fingers grazing the edge of a scorched piece of fabric, red nylon, melted and torn. Sarah's voice trembled. "That's Lena's jacket, from the photo." Jesse turned toward the wall and saw what the firelight had once revealed. Dozens of handprints, overlapping in soot, pressed in haste or panic, some smeared as if clawing for escape, and beneath them, etched in deep cuts into the rock, the same phrase from the cabin, "He's still here." But it wasn't the words that chilled them. It was the handprints. Some were too small, some were too fresh. Jesse whispered, "They came here. Maybe he kept them here." Ivy stood, her expression unreadable, or maybe they came on their own. Further inside, a narrow tunnel led downward, damp and silent. The air was thick now, heavy with a smell Jesse couldn't name. They descended slowly, carefully, until they reached a smaller chamber where the ceiling opened slightly, letting in a single beam of light through a crack in the stone above. There, in the shaft of light, sat a rusted metal tin. Sarah opened it with gloved hands. Inside were more letters, some new. Dated 2004. Jesse froze. That was 3 years after the girls vanished. The first letter was from Lena. Her handwriting was shakier, but still hers. "I don't know if this will ever be found. I don't know if I'm still real. But I write to remember. Naomi is gone. Haley is not the same. We heard someone last night. He called my name. But it wasn't him anymore." The second letter was from Haley. "It's been too long. We don't know the date. We don't know where the sun went. Lena doesn't sing. I think I saw Naomi in the cave wall, like a shadow, like a stain. I'm tired of writing." Jesse's hands trembled as he read the third. It wasn't signed. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Not Drest's. Not the girls. The lines were erratic. "I watched them, I fed them, I kept them safe. The forest wanted them, but I said no. I tried, but they kept calling me him. I'm not him. I'm not him. I just stayed." Jesse looked up slowly. "There was someone else," he whispered. "Another person." Sarah's face was pale. A second presence, another watcher. Ivy's voice was low, distant. Or one became the other. "We don't know who went mad first." They stood in silence until Jesse noticed something scrawled on the far wall, something faint but fresh. "Turn off your lights," he said. In the pitch dark, the symbols glowed faintly, drawn with lichen or some bioluminescent fungus. A spiral, a triangle, 3 names, then a fourth, smeared out. "He tried to become part of them," Jesse whispered. "He wasn't just watching. He wanted to be inside their story." They climbed out in silence, the cave growing colder behind them, the forest still too still. As they reached the ridge, Jesse turned back one last time, staring into the mouth. And this time, he didn't imagine it. A figure stood just inside the threshold, not moving, not hiding, just watching. Jesse raised his flashlight. The beam struck the figure's face, blank, pale, eyes unfocused. A man, thin, bearded, wild-eyed, not old, not young. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. Then, slowly he raised a hand and pointed, not at them, but at the cave, and then he stepped back into the darkness. Gone. Jesse didn't chase. He couldn't. No one did. Because somehow they knew. That wasn't Alan dressed. That was someone else. Someone who had never left Dot. The silence that followed their return from the cave was not the silence of peace, but the kind that seeps under the skin and nests there, heavy, vibrating with unfinished echoes. Back at the station, Ivy laid the bioluminescent sketches onto tracing paper, hoping to preserve their shape before they faded. The triangle was obvious: Lena, Haley, Naomi, but it was the fourth name, half-formed, smeared out deliberately as if someone had tried to erase it, that haunted them most. Sarah zoomed in on high-resolution photos of the markings, isolating curves and indentations, trying to reconstruct what it had once said. "Starts with a J," she murmured. "Maybe Jesse?" Jesse didn't flinch. He'd considered it too, but he hadn't been near the ridge in 2001. He was in college, states away, trying to escape the ghosts of his childhood that now had clawed their way back into the frame. What if it wasn't a name? Ivy said softly. What if it was a title? They stared at her. What do you mean? She turned to a page from one of Drest's journals, the last intact one before his handwriting unraveled completely. She pointed to a sentence, half hidden in the margins. The fourth isn't named. The forest names it. The one who listens longest becomes the one who stays. Jesse read it again, slower this time. The one who listens becomes... Ivy nodded. Becomes the next. Sarah's voice cracked. You think someone else went through what Dress did? That the forest chose another? Or it needed one, Ivy replied. Someone who stayed too long. Someone who stopped searching and started watching. Jesse's phone buzzed, an alert from an old forest camera trap they had repaired weeks ago but never expected to function. The photo was grainy, snapped at 3:08 a.m. from a tree on the southern side of the ridge, near the base of the valley. In the image, barely visible, was a figure walking uphill, barefoot, carrying what looked like a blanket, or maybe a body. But it was the second frame that chilled them, because this time the figure turned toward the camera. The eyes glinted white, the mouth was slightly open, and across the lower jaw was a jagged scar that ran ear to chin. Jesse whispered, "We've seen him before." Sarah nodded slowly. He was in one of the old search party photos. Background? Just a blur, but there. Ivy pulled up the archived images. After several minutes, she found it. A photo from late October 2001, just days after the girls disappeared. Searchers in bright jackets, dogs sniffing the trailhead, and behind them, nearly out of frame, a man standing alone by a tree. Thin, unshaven, eyes unreadable. That's him, Jesse said. But he wasn't a ranger. He wasn't with the team. Ivy spoke almost in a whisper. We never identified him. No one remembered seeing him. Sarah stared at the screen. He was already watching. Even then. The next day, they returned to the area where the photo had been taken. The forest here felt newer, more vibrant, as if it were healing. But Jesse couldn't shake the sense that something had changed, that they were no longer searching for clues, but being led, lured even, by someone who had waited long enough. They found the clearing just after noon. A ring of stones had been set there, too precise to be accidental. At the center sat a crude figure made from branches and strips of cloth, a faceless effigy, arms stretched wide, and beneath it, half buried in leaves, was a shoe, red, child-sized. Sarah gasped. That's Lena's! Jesse knelt beside it, heart hammering. Why place it here? After all these years? Ivy didn't answer. She turned away, staring at something in the trees. Jesse followed her gaze. Someone stood just beyond the clearing, tall, thin, unmoving. This time, no one blinked. They stepped toward him slowly. The man didn't run. He waited. When they were close enough to see the lines on his face, Jesse finally spoke. Who are you? The man tilted his head. You've already guessed. His voice was dry, hollow. You've read the walls. You've read the names. Jesse's throat tightened. Are you the fourth? The man's lips twitched, not quite a smile. Not at first. Sarah stepped forward. Did you take them? The man looked past her, toward the effigy. I didn't take anyone. They stayed. I stayed. We just listened. That's what the forest wants. It wants listeners. Ivy's voice cracked. Where are the girls? He was quiet for a long time, then gone, but not lost. Jesse's fists clenched. What does that mean? The man looked at him finally. Really looked. They live in the trees now, in the stone, in the breath between branches. He raised his hand and pointed to the ridge. They wrote themselves into this place, so did I. And now, so will you. Jesse shook his head. No, we came to end this. The man stepped back into the trees. You came too late. And with that, he vanished. Not running, not hiding, just gone. As if the forest had swallowed him whole. Sarah stared at the trees. He wasn't alone. Ivy nodded slowly. No, he never was. Jesse felt it then. A breeze that didn't belong. A whisper in the leaves. And beneath his feet, the earth pulsed once, like something alive. The storm rolled in faster than expected. Clouds coiling like dark veins across the sky, heavy with the weight of something unspoken. Jesse, Sarah, and Ivy stood at the edge of the ridge, staring into the forest, as thunder cracked in the distance, the last words of the man in the trees still echoing in Jesse's skull. You came too late. Ivy clutched the final piece of the puzzle, an old Ranger radio Jesse had pulled from the back of the old fire tower earlier that morning, buried beneath decades of dust and reports never filed. It was a relic, analog, scratched with initials, AD. And though no one had used it in over 20 years, Jesse couldn't explain why it still worked. A single red light blinked when he powered it on. No static. No hum. Just that light. Ivy turned the volume up and waited. At first there was silence, then 3 clicks, a pause, 2 clicks, a longer pause, then 1. Morse, Sarah whispered, eyes wide. It's repeating. That's W, then I, then L. Jesse's voice was tight. Will. Another pause, then more clicks. You. Will you? Ivy paled. It's a message from inside the ridge. Jesse stared at the blinking light, jaw clenched. It's live. Without another word, they set out again, back toward the mouth. The trail was soaked, the rain now coming down in sheets, turning the ground slick and unpredictable. Branches clawed at them, as if the forest itself were trying to slow them down, pull them back. But they didn't stop, not now. When they reached the crevice, something felt different. The air inside was no longer cold. It was warm, humid, thick with breath. The tunnels echoed with a low, pulsing hum. Not mechanical, not natural. Alive. Deeper into the cave, the light from their flashlights seemed to bend, like it wasn't strong enough to push against what waited. They reached the spiral chamber. The glowing symbols were gone, but something else remained. A voice. Not in their ears, in their heads. A girl's voice. Or many. Whispering, layered, fragmented. He watched. We waited. You called. Sarah dropped to her knees. It's them. It's Lena. Ivy's hand trembled. They never left. Jesse stepped forward into the light shaft, the radio clenched in his hand. The red light blinked faster now. Then it went solid. And then, through the static, came a voice. Soft. Breathy. Familiar. Jesse. He froze. That name. That tone. From another time. A memory buried under years of silence. Haley? The cave responded, not with sound, but vibration. The stones thrummed, the floor shifted. The spiral on the wall pulsed with dim light. Jesse lifted the radio. What do you want? The answer was instant. To be remembered. Ivy whispered. They were forgotten. No, the voice replied. We were erased. Then silence. Jesse turned to Sarah. That figure, the fourth one, he didn't kill them. Sarah's voice was dry. He absorbed them. Ivy's face contorted. Or became their vessel. He stayed long enough, heard them long enough, and now they speak through him. The radio buzzed again, a new signal, coordinates, specific, exact. Jesse entered them into his GPS. It was a few hundred yards deeper, farther than they had dared to go. They went. The walls narrowed, the air grew warmer, and then they entered the final chamber. At the center sat a pool, black, still, mirror-like. Around it were scattered objects, Naomi's necklace, Lena's sketchbook, Haley's boot, all untouched by time. Sarah knelt beside the pool and saw her own face ripple, and then another behind it. Haley, smiling, mouth open. screaming. Sarah screamed and fell back. The image was gone. Ivy touched the surface. It glowed under her fingers. "This isn't water," she said. "It's memory." Jesse reached into the water and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. Inside, a locket. Haley's. He opened it. Inside were 2 photos. One of the 3 girls, arms around each other. The other burned. But through the singed edges, he could see himself. Jesse, at age 16. The year they vanished. He shook his head. "No, I wasn't there." Ivy met his gaze. "Are you sure?" Sarah whispered, "You said you were in college, but weren't you at Olympic Ridge the weekend before? Your father was stationed here then." Jesse's vision blurred. "That was just a visit. I was only here for a day. We never crossed paths." Ivy stepped forward. "What if you did?" Jesse looked down at the locket. The forest shifted. And then he remembered. Just a flash, a moment. A girl in the trees, red jacket, laughing, then screaming, then gone. He had seen her. He had seen them. He had turned away. The radio clicked once, then again. "You forgot." Jesse fell to his knees. "Oh my God," Ivy whispered. "You were the 4th, not him." The chamber trembled. The pool began to rise. Jesse dropped the radio into it. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't mean to forget." The water surged. Voices rose. "But we remembered you." Then light, blinding. A scream not of pain but of release. When Jesse opened his eyes, the chamber was empty. The pool gone. The items vanished. Just stone. Ivy helped him stand. "They're free now," she said. Sarah nodded. "And so are we." Outside, the storm had cleared. The forest was silent, but not heavy, just still. And above them, for the first time in days, the sun broke through the clouds and warmed the ridge. 12 years ago, 3 girls vanished without a trace. Today, we know they were never truly gone. They became part of something older than time, something that listened, remembered, and waited. And in the end, it wasn't justice they wanted. It was memory, to be seen, to be believed, to be free. Some say the forest took them. Others believe they chose to stay. But maybe the real mystery isn't who disappeared into the forest. It's who came back out. Because some stories don't end. They echo.